Welcome to the Fair and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. More than 40,000 people in Australia are living and working in conditions of modern slavery. It's a startling statistic and not a conversation you'd expect us to be having in Australia in 2023. The pressure is on both the federal government and companies of all shapes and sizes to ensure modern slavery isn't thriving within supply chains. Nicholas Bernhardt is the CEO of Informed 365 and works with some of Australia's biggest companies to help stamp out modern slavery, from Lendlease and Mirvac to Coles and Treasury Wine Estates. Nicholas, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Thanks, Sean. Good to be here.
Now, the numbers are huge, but perhaps we should do a definition first so that kind of clarifies why there are so many people living and working in conditions of modern slavery. How do you define modern slavery?
Oh, look, the Australian government's been very kind on this one. They've clearly defined what falls under modern slavery, and the key aspects are debt bondage, deceptive recruiting for labour or services, forced labour, forced marriage, servitude, slavery, and the worst forms of child labour. So it's pretty well defined in Australia as to what constitutes modern slavery.
Okay, so 40,000 people are living and working in these conditions. I saw some figures from a few years ago, I think it was 2016, that said 15,000 people were living in modern slavery. Is the problem getting worse? Are we getting better at identifying it? What's going on there, do you think?
Well, I think it's a combination of both. The problem's definitely getting worse because, unfortunately, there's still a lot of money to be made in making people work for nothing, or making them work for money that no one will get out of bed for if there wasn't other pressures on them. So the problem is getting worse. And then it got compounded by issues such as COVID, because we saw a huge spike during COVID as well that bumped up the numbers. I mean, the last number we had was in 2017, where the global number was 40 million, and that got bumped up by a significant 10 million in the last report, and that's now at 50 million that was released last September. So a 10 million increase globally over, what would that be, five years. And even those numbers are very hard to verify as well. I would actually be quite cautious in saying that's the number. It could be a lot higher, depending obviously on the definitions. In Australia, we've got pretty clear definitions, but I reckon the number could be a lot higher.
Okay, Nicholas, so it's not getting any better, certainly. Are there certain sectors or industries that are more likely where we're going to see a prevalence of modern slavery?
Oh, absolutely. So in Australia, there's quite a few sectors that are typically affected by this. It's sort of the cleaning, security and catering side of business. It's food production and agriculture. If we look sort of further afield outside of Australia, it's clothing, fashion, electronics, solar panels, promotional products, IT. So it's very wide ranging in Australia, depending, obviously, we don't have that much manufacturing happening here anymore, but it's definitely around the cleaning, security, food production, agriculture.
Okay, how hard is it for a company, particularly a large company, and you work with some of the big guys, to know whether their supply chains involve modern slavery?
It's very hard, and it's a very good question. It's something that is more of a journey. It's not something that you have instant transparency down your supply chains just because you want to have it. And it has taken the leaders in this space literally years and years to have that transparency. So it takes almost a forensic approach to start engaging with your direct suppliers and start working with them and pushing that message around modern slavery and better corporate behavior down your supply chain. So there's no easy fix on this. It is all about engaging with your suppliers, starting the narrative, starting the conversations, and building that sort of picture of your supply chain as you go along. And that is, it is a medium to long-term project to get that transparency in your supply chains.
Stay with me, Nicholas. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Nicholas Bernhardt, Chief Executive Officer of Informed 365. What I thought was interesting recently, I was talking to my 21-year-old and we were talking about using the Black Friday, Cyber Monday sales to buy stuff for Christmas. And I said, here's a really cheap website, which I found it had been advertised. And his response to me was, yeah, but do they have kids making their stuff? And what surprised me about it was that he was aware of it and didn't want to buy from a website where where he perceived modern slavery could have been involved. Something I had never even thought of.
A really good point, and it is good to see that that generation or the younger generations are actually are aware of this and are looking out for these sort of almost warning signals. I mean, if you've got a website proclaiming that they've got the cheapest t-shirts, it is almost a given that someone in the production of that t-shirt, and it's normally the worker, has been exploited in the process. So cheap t-shirt is a great thing for the one that wants to wear it, but maybe not so good for the person that's making that t-shirt. And there is sort of a common thread. So if you've got sectors where there's high labor intensity, there's low cost of products or materials, remote rural work, casual work, low paid cash in hand work, temporary and migrant visa workers, another huge problem. And even aspects such as single gender workforces, all of these can be sort of almost a warning signal that there is something that may be slightly amiss in a certain sector.
Okay, so the government has introduced modern slavery legislation in recent years. Is it doing enough?
Well, my honest answer would be no, it isn't. It's a really good starting point, but it needs to have more bite. And in order to have more bite, when you introduce a new legislation, it is critical to have something that's going to make organizations not only compliant, but go that extra yard as well. And in that regard, I'm sort of talking about penalties as a key driver to this, and also lowering the threshold, because currently the threshold for an organization to report is $100 million turnover. And in the last review, it's been suggested that that should be dropped down to 50 million turnover, which we would welcome in conjunction or in addition to penalties.
Okay, so you've worked with a bunch of big companies, Lendlease, Stockland, Mirvac. I've got the list here: Osgrid, Treasury, Wine Estates, Coal, Sydney Water, Flight Centre, etc. What's their approach to this? How seriously do they treat it?
Look, good to see that some companies or a lot of organizations are really trying to do the right thing in this space. And the approach that we have sort of been promoting in this space is to work collaboratively. Because typically a new legislation gets introduced and every organization tries to grapple with this new legislation for better or for worse. And so our approach has been to work collaboratively and collectively with entire industries. And you've mentioned some of the organizations that work in a property sector consortium, as we call it, to try and collectively combat modern slavery. And I think that is the way that we're going to change the world. And it always reminds me that question of one of the early conversations that we had around, and it was, I think I can name the company, it was Stockland. They said, look, Stockland, we're a reasonably large organization in Australia. But if we go overseas and we're buying goods and services from an organization or a factory, we are one of 1,000 companies that are buying off that factory. We will have very little impact if we start demanding different ways of behaving. But if we appear as an entire industry where we're representing, in this case, the property sector consortium represents $2 trillion in assets under management. If they go out to their suppliers and say, this is the expected behavior, that's when we'll see impact.
What do you hope happens in the next 5 to 10 years, Nicholas?
Oh, look, I've mentioned two things. Penalties and lowering of the threshold will be the immediate things that I'd be looking for. But the next step would be that every organization starts looking at human rights and environment and governance as part of doing business. That's the way of doing business. And it's not sort of an add-on. That people are aware, look, there are issues in human rights. We need to treat our environment more respectfully. I want everything, all these aspects to come together, that it is business as usual, being a good corporate citizen, and that the ones that do not want to go down that path, A, that we shine a light on them, B, give them a chance to change their ways and become a better corporate citizen, and then C, if they do not want to change, that those businesses go a sorry way. That's my ideal world scenario, and I'm a bit of an idealist, obviously.
That's a good thing. Nicholas, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Appreciate the time. Thanks very much.
That was Nicholas Bernhardt, CEO of Informed 365. This is the Fear and Greed business interview. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's best business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.